Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Nathalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Nathalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Nathalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. So you might remember Amber as my guest from episode number 27, where we spoke about the way she dealt with the loss of her husband Tim when she was just 32 years old. Since then, a lot has happened in Amber's life, and today we're going to talk about the accidental trauma she had to deal with. I think it was just over 6 months ago, but we get into this, and she will tell us more about this in her own words. She actually survived a fall from a zipline. And what inspired me to ask Amber to be my guest again is the way she's dealing with trauma and grief. She, to me, is a beacon of light and a living model of finding joy in life amidst its hardship. Basically, I admire her and her ability to pick herself up, dust herself off, and start all over again, as in Nat King Cole's song. So a little bit more about my guest of the week. Amber Jackson is a single mom of 4, one with special needs, and a divorce survivor, cancer widow, fun seeker, and lover of all things having to do with kitchen dance parties and cheesecake. Me too, by the way. She's a certified public speaker and loves speaking to women and teens about finding joy in the unexpected. Life's challenges haven't stopped her from living life to the fullest. Amber is a self-proclaimed life enthusiast and is determined to see everything that life has to offer, including the bad, as something she can learn from. She has a huge appreciation for life and all the things that make one happy. She believes that all lights twinkle, that there can be magic laced in music, and there is strength in even the smallest of breath. So welcome, Amber.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me back. I'm so excited.
Well, I can tell you I'm excited too, but also I'm still in a little bit of disbelief because not usually I speak about the time or the weather because we want to get right into the middle of the nitty-gritty details about how to deal with grief and trauma. But I want to tell the listener this is like 1:30 in the morning for Amber. It's 10:30 in the morning for me. But if you follow or if you don't follow Amber, go and follow her because she speaks every day and night on her Instagram profile. But 1:30 in the morning for a podcast, I think I never had a guest around that time. But how do you do that with 4 kids? I mean, you chose the time. It wasn't me suggesting it. How do you deal with your life and the 4 kids and all that is happening?
Well, I think I chose this time because I knew they'd all be asleep. They couldn't come in and interrupt in the middle of it. So it was kind of a foolproof moment for me. I'd rather wake up in the middle of the night and do this and have the time to be able to speak freely than have them running in and out.
Yeah.
So, but in general, I wonder that every day. I wake up every day and just know that it's truly by the Lord that I'm able to get things done. And I have a great community of family and friends in my church that just have stepped in wonderfully. So I'm very blessed.
So, one of the topics I wanted to talk about with you was the way you dealt with your accidental trauma. And maybe give the listener a little bit of an overview over what happened for them to be able to see where you went through, what you came through, and how you are today here sitting across Zoom from me.
Yeah. So it was about 7, almost not quite 8 months ago. I was camping with my kids and they had a zip line going, and I not normally one to go down a zip line. I'm terribly afraid of heights, but my kids really wanted me to go. And so I did, and I ended up falling from the zip line. It was about 30 feet that I fell. And it was pretty scary. It's pretty scary for all of us. I had to get air backed out of there. The helicopter had to come get me. I ended up going to the hospital and didn't need surgery or anything, but I had a cast or a brace on 3 of my limbs, both of my hands, and then a boot on my left foot. So my mom had to move in with us for a couple of weeks because I couldn't bathe them. I couldn't cook. I could hardly bathe myself. My face had so much road rash. It just looked pretty bad, which I know was scary for the kids. So it was rough for a little bit. Like it was pretty scary for all of us. And then just knowing my long recovery that I had after that, um, I think more than anything, I was just grateful for what it could have been, but it wasn't. When I was laying in that field, there was a lot of concern for my back, my neck, my pelvis, my spine, internal bleeding, and all kinds of things. And so the fact that it was really just some minor breaks and torn ligaments was truly a blessing.
Yeah, so let's go a little bit slower because you're talking about
Yeah.
this, summarizing this, you're smiling through all of it, but I can tell in resonance to what you're talking about, this pressure in my solar plexus, like a bit of pressure, and I can feel my body's reacting to the actual words that you're saying of, you mentioned a little fall, and so it sounded like whoosh and it's over. Yes, of course, now 8 months later we look back and we have hindsight and we have an understanding of what happened, and you can reflect back on it, and that's the benefit of having this conversation. But I mean, you shared some pictures on Instagram, so people who follow you, they have seen what it looked like. But I mean, looking is one thing, but feeling from inside and having to go through that moment by moment is a completely different thing. And I want to go back to the start because you said something important there. You said, I'm actually afraid of heights.
Yeah.
And going on a zip line, being afraid of heights, is already something that, to me, listening to you with the nervous system goes like, ooh. So tell us, from the moment that your kids wanted you to go, you said, what made you decide to do that? Was it like a way to enjoy life, to do things, to live to the fullest, as you say, or what do you think made you do it?
So I think I had two major thoughts. And in doing the zip line, they had kids going up there too. Kids as young as like 2 years old in these little itty bitty harnesses. And my 4-year-old daughter, she was the one that first wanted to go. And that's not normally something I would have thought she would have wanted to do. So I was surprised that she wanted to. So I said, that's totally fine. We can get you in the harness. And so she got in the harness and she got up the ladder and got all the way attached into the edge. And then she realized that it was just too high. It was too scary for her. She's 4, for how high that was. So then we got her down, and I had this good conversation with her about how I was so proud of her, and she didn't need to be disappointed because it was a big deal that she even tried. And I thought she was so brave. So we just had a good conversation about being brave and being strong when things are scary, and it's okay if you didn't follow through with it. And after we got her down, then she said to me, Mom, you should be a brave girl. You should go on the zip line.
Oh,
and so
that backfired.
Yeah. So I'm like, I can't have this conversation with her about how proud I was of her and how she was such a brave girl and then be like, oh, but I'm not going to do it. So I'm like, well, I'm going to show her that we can do hard things, whether
but
you do it or not.
Wouldn't that be the same if you go up and then say, no, it's also too high for me. I have to come down.
Yeah, I mean, hindsight's 2020, right? Like it would have been the same thing, but I know she was so excited. My mom's going to go down the zip line. I couldn't do it, but my mom's going to do it. She was so excited. So I'm like, okay. And then the other part of me, once I had committed to it for her, it was this inner part of me that was like, yeah, I am going to live this life. My husband passed away. At this point, it had been about 15 months since he died. And I just had this zest of life of like, I'm going to live this life that he wasn't able to live. And I think he'd be up there so proud of me. He'd also think I was being a brave girl, for going down this zip line when he knows how much I don't like that. And I had a great time up until I fell.
Yeah. So you had a good time until you didn't. And I think it's also important for people to hear that this is not a recipe to not do things because they could be dangerous. But you chose to live the life that he couldn't, which I think is a good and beautiful way to live your life after loss.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, for me, I say that we are not healing to not feel grief or to handle our grief. We are healing because we're used to grief, but we're healing to be able to handle
Yeah.
the joy and handle life again.
Yeah. So I was at this point where I could feel like an inner change happening within me. Like I said, it had been about 15 months and I could start to see this, like, I'm I'm actually finding happiness, like true happiness. I can feel it in my heart and in my soul. So it was just in that timing, during that time, that I was like, yeah, I'm going to go down the zip line. I'm going to live life for the both of us. I remember that being my thought, was live life for the both of us. And I'm going to show him, like, look what I'm doing. Look, I'm doing this wonderful thing. I'm going down a zip line. So I don't regret it. I did it.
And so what happened that you fell?
It was super bizarre. So this is the next layer. I had asked him, I told the guy up there, I'm really afraid of heights. But I kind of want to do something fun because again, I don't see myself ever doing a zip line after this. So like, what's something fun I can do? So he told me a couple of different positions I could go down. And one of them was like Spider-Man style, which is upside down. And so again, I'm thinking I'm living life for the both of us. So I jumped off the thing and then on purpose flipped myself upside down. So I was still holding on with one hand, but my legs were wrapped around the cable that was attaching my harness to the line. And my legs started to slip out. I was able to right myself to where I was now like proper. My feet were below me and I wasn't upside down anymore. But in the process, my legs ended up flipping out completely. So when I was only holding on with the one hand after that, like I dangled like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible at some point, and then I ended up falling. And the nothing on the harness was broken. Nothing came unclasped. Nothing broke. Nothing came undone. I was just no longer in the harness. They spent so much time trying to figure out what happened. So I don't know if it was just like the perfect angle of my hips when I flipped upside down just slipped right out.
Also, your
or
hips
what,
flipped
but
out of the harness that was attached to
my,
the zip line.
yes, yeah, yeah, my hips slid out. So when I hit the ground, the harness was still attached to the zip line. I was just no longer in it. And they took it down and they inspected it. And like I said, nothing was broken. Nothing came unclasped where it should have been. I just wasn't in it.
So basically you slid down the zip line on your hand in the end.
Yeah, so even though I was upside down, I was still holding on where you can hold on with your hand because I had one hand that I couldn't let go of. So my legs started to slide out. So then I dangled. Once my hips and my legs had fully flipped out of the harness, I was then just holding on with the one hand, hoping that I could just hold on down the line the rest of the way. But I always say Tom Cruise makes it look way easier in the movies because it was actually really hard to do. And I only held on for a second or two before I physically couldn't hold my body weight with my one hand. And that's when I fell.
Oof. I mean, I already get that, the pressure in my solar plexus again. But still, I think it's one thing to describe what happened in the purpose of understanding what happened afterwards. You know, how your body then dealt with that and how your community held you through that. So you fell, in terms of the zip line, like how far, or like of the 100%, were you down to where the end would be?
Maybe 25, 30%. Like I was only a quarter to a third of the way.
Okay. So that happened pretty quickly.
So pretty quickly. Yeah. I flipped upside down. I went for a couple seconds and then I started to slip.
And your younger two kids watched you being on the zip line as well?
Yeah. So my older two were with their dad for the weekend. I was just there with my younger two and they watched the whole thing happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what happened when you were on the ground?
So I got the wind knocked out of me pretty good. I know I was out of it. I didn't completely lose consciousness. I was there with my church and my family was there. So my brother-in-law got to me first and I came to when there were already a ton of people surrounded me. So I know I was rolling around pretty good when he got there to me, but I was bleeding pretty bad from the head. I couldn't open my eyes for about 20 minutes. I'm not sure if it was the shock or the pain, but I know that they were flushing my eyes because it was in this meadow, but I landed right where they had a dirt road going right through the meadow because the landowners, so they could get from like one side to the other. So I landed like right in that dirt road and rolled. So I know they were flushing my eyes of all of the dirt and just pulling out teeny tiny rocks. So they were concerned about, are her eyes scratched? I know they said when they found me that I looked like a jack-o'-lantern. My teeth were just jagged is what it looked like. Thankfully, it was all just dirt because there was concern of, oh, she just knocked out half of her teeth. It was just dirt once they were able to flesh that out. And then, like I said, my head was bleeding pretty bad. My ankle was facing a funny direction. I had fingers that were facing the wrong direction. And so there were some people in my church community that are nurses. So they immediately called 911. You know, they're checking me out. Don't move. You know, can you feel this? Can you feel that? And I remember they asked me, like, can you feel it here? You know, my arms, my body, my legs, can you feel this? And I could feel everything. And they told me that I was moving my limbs, but in my mind, I was not able to move anything. So I know that they told me, like, no, you were lifting your arms or like your leg and everything. But so physically I was able to, but like mentally, I felt like I just could not move anything there in that field, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
So you were conscious of how you felt from within, but they were giving you feedback at that moment that you're moving?
Yeah. Like I remember one time they said, can you lift your leg? Because they wanted to see like how much strength I had and everything. And I was like, I don't think I can move them. And they were like, no, you're moving it just fine.
So you were talking at that time as well?
Oh yeah. So the story, I know that when I'm in shock, I get very chatty. And I've heard a lot of, now that we've all been able to look back on it and laugh, I've heard a lot of stories about how I actually didn't shut up. Like I just talked the whole time. And once the paramedics got there, I offered them breakfast, and I felt so bad that they were there because I interrupted their breakfast. And I,
taking care of others.
I just kept talking, and it was a comical moment. Now that we've been able to look back and laugh about it, it was very comical.
Whew. But then also what is important for me to go into here is that, the immediate time after the trauma per se, the fall, people were around you. And you said you were there with your church group. And I want to exemplify that because that is one of the things we talk about in trauma. Trauma happens also because people are left alone with what they have to deal with, mentally, physically, emotionally, or spiritually. So in your case, you had people there, and you described that there were nurses, so you felt in good hands. And tell us a little bit about what you remember from that moment.
So I remember coming to, and like I said, there were already people completely surrounded. And there was one woman in particular, she was up by my head, and I could feel she had her whole hands, both of her hands around my head, making sure I didn't move my neck. And she's a neighbor of my parents and has been for, I don't know, close to 20 years, maybe even more. And I know she's a nurse. So when I was unable to open my eyes, but when I heard her voice, I immediately thought, like, I'm going to be okay, because her name's Tracy. Tracy's here, And so I just thought, okay. And she has such a calming voice. And then my parents were there too. And I could hear my dad right next to her. So I'm still unable to open my eyes, but I could hear that he's right there. And I can hear my mom, she's a little farther away, but I could hear that she's right there. And then one of the women who picked up my leg and said, Amber, I've got your leg. I need to put ice on it. Okay. But this is me touching you. She's been a really good friend. So I think at one point I said, oh my gosh, you guys are my people. Because if I were to be in that situation, those are the people that I would want. Like, it was just people that I didn't have to open my eyes to know who it was. I could feel their presence. I could hear their voice. So I just knew, okay, all I need to do is just lay here. Like, they will take care of it. Because my thought immediately was, my nurse brain kicked in, and I'm like, did they call 911? But I knew, okay, they already did. And then I also, at one point, had said, someone please take my kids. I don't want them to see this. And my daughter had been begging me to go on a nature walk. So I had told her, we'll do the zip line, we'll go on a walk. So I just kept saying, someone take her on a nature walk. I know she wants to bring sticks home. So someone said, we have your kids. So it was just such a comfort that I knew, like, this is probably really bad. And all I need to do is just lay here, because I just felt like my people had me.
Yeah. And you just exemplified what is really important after trauma. You said people around you, you heard the voices, you knew who it was, hands there. And you said, I knew I felt safe. I was taken care of. So I want to speak also to those people through that they exactly did the right thing. I don't know if they're trauma informed, but from what they did, these nurses, I don't know how much training nurses have in being trauma informed, but this is really good first help in relation to the trauma. Because yes, your body needs to be taken care of, but also the psyche needs to deal with that trauma. And that's a longer story than the scars on your face and on your arms and legs.
Yeah. They were truly amazing. I know this particular nurse that was by my head, she's she's a labor and delivery nurse. And so she was like, this is not like my field, like I don't normally do these kind of traumas, but yet she just had the most calming voice to me. And I don't know if it's because I know her and I consider her a dear friend, but she was such a calming force for me, truly.
And then your kids were taken care of, because also I was wondering about your kids. Maybe we can talk about that later as well, just how the kids dealt with that on a longer term, because I know you shared about that as well. But let's maybe go back then. 911 came and you were taken to hospital, I remember. What happened then?
So I know that they put me in the helicopter, and they had, everyone standing back because we were in the middle of this field. And it was said that my daughter, after the helicopter left, they were trying to make it fun for my kids. Like, oh, mom gets to go on a helicopter ride. That's so cool. And after they took me away, my 4-year-old just very casually turned to the woman standing next to her. And she said, yeah, my dad died and lives with Jesus now. And now my mom's going to go live with Jesus too. And then just walked away. Like it was like something that happens every day. And so in that moment, like, I don't think they fully processed what was happening, but I know in her little mind, she just did not. It was very scary, even though she was very casual about it. I think her inner mind was like, oh, what's happening? Because then after I came home and I was home, she struggled for a little bit. And she told me a few days later, yeah, I was really nervous and I thought I wasn't going to have a family. And so that was a lot that we had to work through as well. But that was scary, and it was okay to feel scared about it.
Yeah, because people watching something traumatic happen, they have what's called secondary trauma. And I mean, children at a younger age, like Charlotte and your little boy, they deal with grief in a different way than when they're older. But in terms of seeing what has happened to you, that's something that they deal with within themselves. And it can be something that is and stays with them for some time. Well, that's time will tell.
Yeah.
So maybe tell us, I mean, you said we had to work through that. How did you work through that? I mean, first of all, you were also dealing with your side of the trauma, and then hers. How did you, as a parent, manage that with her?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for the first week, I really wasn't able to move out of bed by myself at all. I know the first day or two, anytime I needed to roll over, my mom had to come in and kind of roll me over just because my body hurt so bad. And then going to the bathroom, she almost had to carry me because I had my one working leg, but I had to hop, and hopping hurt my body too bad. So I was just really in bed the whole time. And so my daughter would come in and lay with me, and, we would watch TV or we'd play a little game together, and I would just kind of let her talk freely. Or I might ask her, like, how did you feel about that? And for both her and my son, he's now 3, but he was 2.5 at the time. They both would ask me a lot, like, you fell from a zip line. And I would say, yes, I did. And they would say, and, at the time, immediately after, they would be like, oh, and you hurt here, and your hand is broken, and your hurt foots. Or they'd touch me and be like, does this hurt? So sometimes I would be like, yeah, that's a soft spot. That's a boo-boo. Or like, no, that part is good. You can touch that part. So I was very open with them. Like, I did fall and it hurt really bad. And this hand is feeling a lot better today. Like, see how I'm healing, and the doctors are working hard on this hand, and it's going to get better soon. So I was just very open with them about the process. And I feel like anytime that they had questions, I would just stop and make sure to take the time to answer. And with their little brains, it was a lot of you fell, you hurt here, but you're going to be okay. It was a lot of those questions. And even now, my son, my 3-year-old, he'll still ask me sometimes, Mom, you fell from a zip line. And I would say, yes, I did. And he would say, and you hurt your back. And I would say, yeah, my back was really sore for a while, wasn't it? And then he'd say, but you're okay. And I would say, I'm okay. So just making sure that they felt safe to ask any questions that they needed to.
And it shows
And
that.
I think they needed that reassurance that like, oh, but you're okay, that you're going to be okay. So I just made sure like, yeah, that hurt really bad, but I'm still here. I'm okay. They
Yeah.
needed to know that I wasn't going anywhere.
And it shows that the brain processes it in multiple times. Like
Hmm.
a 2.5, 3 year old process it in a different way than a 4 year old. And then you have your
Yeah.
two older boys who weren't there. So they
Yeah.
heard of what happened. And hearing is like a trauma in the third degree. So how did
Yeah.
they hear about it and how did they deal with it? And how did you manage their dealing with it?
Yeah. So they were with their dad that weekend. It was his weekend anyway. So this is a Saturday that I fell and I was supposed to get them back on Tuesday. So I believe my parents had reached out to their dad on that Saturday and just said like she's been in an accident, she's okay, but it's going to be a rough recovery. And so then I know Monday night, I had then talked to my ex-husband and was like, this is where I'm at. And another part of it was my face looked really rough. Like I had pretty bad road rash. I say that it feels like my face got ripped off. It was really bad. So I knew that I was gonna look scary. My two youngers were kind of used to it. They've been okay with it by at that point. I knew that my 8-year-old was really gonna struggle seeing me like that. So I had called him that Monday night and I talked to my son and, said I was in an accident, but I'm okay. But I need you to know that it looks pretty bad. Like I look worse than what I feel. Actually, I felt awful, but he didn't need to know that, but like it looks pretty bad, but I'm going to be okay. And so, I gave him the option of like, you can stay with dad until my face gets a little bit better. Or so he said, let's FaceTime. So I FaceTimed him that night so he could see it. And, there were some tears. He cried pretty bad. And then he said, no, I want to come home and see you on Tuesday when he was supposed to come home. So we got him from school that day and he came home and I was still in a wheelchair at that point. Because again, this was only what day
Yeah.
3 or 4, I think after the accident. So they got me up in a wheelchair just so I could see the kids. And, like my mom had moved in by that point. And so he just stayed right by my side the whole night. And anytime I needed anything, he's like, oh, I can get you water. I can get you that. And so we just had the same tough conversations, just on a little bit of a higher level of, yeah, that hurt really bad, but I'm going to be okay. Like this is going to look rough for a little while. I am going to take the time I need to heal and I need to go to a lot of doctor's appointments and a lot of therapies, but this is all just externally. I look rough. My spirit's still strong. I'm still here. We're going to get through this. Something I say to my kids all the time is we can do hard things. So that was a moment that I was saying, this is going to be hard for a little while, but we can do hard things.
And then the
So,
oldest one is a different story, right? How did
yes,
he
he's a
take
different
it?
story. So my Jude is my one with Down syndrome and autism. He was 12 at the time. He's since turned 13, but cognitively he's, I don't know, 3 or 4, I'd say. Nonverbal, and he understands more than I think he does, but I don't know how much he really was able to take in. I just know that I looked different and I was in the wheelchair and I was on the knee scooter for a little while. So I wasn't able to bathe him. I wasn't able to do all of those things. And so he like at first looking at me seemed fine. Where I could tell he struggled was going to bed at night. He had a hard time going to bed. So after my husband died, he had a hard time going to bed too. It's almost like that's how he processes things. And my husband was one that would lay with him to go to bed. So I knew when my husband died that he had a hard time going to sleep because dad was no longer here. So that was a hard work that I eventually got him to fall asleep in his bed. And it was hard work. And after that, he just had a hard time going into his room to fall asleep. I couldn't go in there and lay with him. So my mom would, or my dad would come over and lay with him, but he would just want to come in and snuggle next to me to fall asleep. So I would say, that's fine. He can fall asleep in my bed. And then my dad would carry him to his bed because he's a big boy, he's a teenager now. And so that's kind of where we're at now, 8 months later, is that he still falls asleep in my bed. He just has such a hard time. I know that he also had those feelings of like, what happened to mom? My routine is off. Our whole family routine is off. The whole house routine was off with my mom moving in and me not being able to do a lot of stuff. And so I can tell he still needs that comfort level of like, okay, mom, you're here, I'm here. So he falls asleep in my bed and then I carry him to his bed every night.
Wow. So besides looking after 4 children and looking after yourself, dealing with that trauma and that healing, you had a lot on your plate. I mean, it's not just you looking after your body and going to doctors and seeing therapists and doing physiotherapists or whatever you did, but it's also having those little hearts and they're processing it at your forefront.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think initially in the very beginning, like right after it happened, I was just so grateful, honestly, that I was alive because 30 feet is quite a long way to fall. You know,
It
people
is.
have died at a lesser height. So I think in the very beginning, I truly was just grateful that I'm alive, that I'm here, and that really I didn't need any surgery. I didn't need anything like that. I had to do 4 hours a week of therapy between my hand and my foot. So that was for about 8 weeks. So that was a lot. But I was really like, I'm here though. You can't break my spirit. And then it got to be a couple months later, and I realized I think that's where my emotional trauma was starting to come out. And I was like, no, that was actually a very scary moment for me. That was the most scared I've ever been as an adult, probably ever in my life. I can't think of a time as a child that I was ever that scared as I hung there with the one arm knowing I'm probably going to fall right now and I don't know how this is going to end. So then I go to therapy every week, every other week. So that was something that I brought up to her after a couple of months of just I'm struggling. Like that was actually really, really scary. And by that point, I was able to laugh about it. But I'm like, I don't think people understand the level how traumatized I really was by that whole thing.
Yeah. I'm glad you're saying it, Amber. I'm really glad because, obviously you're making sure that your children are not more traumatized by what you are portraying or what you're bringing to them. So you're taking care of their mental health as well. But then you are still left to deal with that. And it's a big thing that you went through. I mean, you looking like you do now and comparing it to a picture from after the accident is huge. But that's the physical part, and the emotional and mental dealing with that happened. As you said, I could have died. It's not a small thing to be faced with existential questions in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to deal with it outside of you, and it's not making any smaller to deal with Tim's death. But then it's yourself,
Right.
And the whole trajectory of life that this would make with your surroundings, with your 4 kids. And that does something to you emotionally. That's something that your head needs to process.
Yeah. And that took me a while to realize that even though I physically was doing better, that I was going to need to put in the emotional work as well. Because right after, like I said, I was just full of so much gratitude. And my mom was here about 3.5 weeks and she works full time. Like she has a job, but she was able to work with her boss and work from home. So she basically moved her whole home office over to my house. So I was in such a hurry to get myself better. I couldn't drive for the first couple weeks. So like I need to get better so that my mom can move back to her home and back into her life. And then my kids can get back to their routine and we can just move on and we can get past this and be okay. So she moved out and I was able to drive even though I was still in a boot on my other leg. And I thought, no, we're doing good. We're getting back to normal and this is what needs to happen. And so it wasn't until a little while later when yeah, like you said, I was having those existential questions of what would my kids have done if I died, and just my family and all of those things that it truly was this these hard feelings of like that. Just like I said, like I don't think people realize like that was really hard. And not just like physically, but like how scared I truly was. That was scary.
So how does Amber take a moment to herself? How does Amber look after herself and not everyone around herself?
That is something I'm still trying to figure out. Definitely still trying to figure out. I take time for the gym, and that was a big deal for me being able to go back to the gym. I had really thought like, okay, I could do it. I could go on an e-scooter and just work on one arm or something like that. And I thought, well, that's silly because didn't have grip strength for a while in either one of my hands. So I took the time needed to heal, and then I started going back to the gym, and that for me is very therapeutic for me to have that time to myself. And let me have a greater appreciation for my body and what my body can do. So I've just kind of had a different mentality about that, about just how strong we are as human beings. And then I have just really tried to take more time to myself. I love to read, so I really make sure that when my kids go to bed, I I make that time a sacred time for me because I only have a short window before I need to go to bed. And so I really try to take that time to decompress myself before I go to bed. So when my kids go to bed, it's like it's sacred Amber time.
I was just wondering, the living through the books. I mean, I've seen your posts, living through books and music, Taylor Swift, but also your sleep. You know, you mentioned a couple of times in your stories that you find it hard to sleep. Is that something that you've experienced prior to the trauma as well, or is that since?
Both. I definitely had a hard time. I've had a hard time sleeping since Tim died, but I would say definitely since after my fall is where it got worse and it got more consistent. Because before he died, it was more of just like here and there, I would toss and turn kind of a thing. And now I'll find moments where I'm just awake for hours and I'm exhausted. My mind and my body are physically exhausted and I just can't sleep. And so that was something I brought up to my therapist. I don't know, a month, 2, 3 months ago. I'm not even sure how long ago, a couple weeks ago, I feel like. And of just like, I cannot sleep. And so she's trying to do a lot of work with me on why I can't sleep. And, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say, but I almost feel like what we've come to is that my body kind of goes into this PTSD every night when I fall asleep. Like I said, I was in that field and they told me my body was moving, but I remember feeling like I couldn't move any part of my body. Like I was like paralyzed is how it felt. And I think it was just the shock of the whole thing. So my body was in fight or flight mode. And there's something about going to sleep at night that when I sleep, my body just thinks, that I'm paralyzed again or that I won't be able to wake up or anything like that. And so we're just really trying to work on processing leaving that in that field 8 months ago and knowing that like I'm okay to fall asleep. I can let my mind relax and I can let my body relax and fall asleep. So it's been a process. We're still working on it.
Yeah, I think you're onto something in terms of that state when you fall asleep. Mm-hmm. So that because from a nervous system point of view, that's when you're in the state of being safe, secure, and resting. But right. in your past memory, there is a place where people tell you you're safe, people tell you you're moving, but you feel the way you said it, like paralyzed. I think I might be paralyzed. And so that sounds like a crossover to, okay, there's the state of before you're falling asleep. You're also still, but somehow your nervous system is not really sure that this is actually a safe place.
Exactly. And so I've even had nights where I did sleep through the night, and sleeping through the night is like 6 hours for me, but where I get 6, 7, maybe even 8 hours, but I wake up and I don't feel rested at all. And to where that's been another thing is even though I'm asleep, my body is not, it's like my body is so tight. It's not able to fully relax and get me into that full REM cycle. And I'm not able to let go of all of that enough to get the rest that I need, even though I've slept. So yeah, it's amazing what the body will hold on to, even though there are nights where I'm like, I'm not stressed about it. I feel fine. I just really would like to sleep.
Well, that's one part. It's the conscious mind knowing that and thinking that. And then there's the whole other part. And exactly. As far as I have been told or learned, 97% of your system is subconscious and 3% is conscious.
Wow.
So there's probably more to discover. And we've spoke about that. We spoke about that before, that you find therapy very beneficial and still going to that. But we want to make sure that Amber can go back to bed, given the time that you are here with me.
I normally would have been awake now anyway, so it's okay. And I always love chatting with you, so it's not a problem.
You would be awake now anyway because you can't sleep, or because you're reading?
I can't sleep. Yeah. So I was able to fall asleep tonight, but normally this is the time that I'm awake. So I think that's probably why I scheduled it this time, is knowing there's a good chance I'll be awake anyway. So,
okay. But still, first of all, I think people can come to your page and see anyway how you're going and how you're transitioning. There might be even a third time we will talk about what has happened with that, because I think there is still some things, and you're onto something from what you're saying, you're talking about with your therapist. So I'm really interested to see how that transitions. And if anyone listening is a therapist and has some ideas for Amber, I mean, I have a lot of other people in mind that would give you a lot of suggestions, but here it's not about giving suggestions or advice, but it's about you telling others how you dealt with it so far. And I always say, I think it's a quote by someone, as long as you're breathing, you're still doing your job and your chores. So thank you so much, Amber, for this conversation here today.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure for me.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nathaliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Nathalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.